Okay, hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Honors from Off the Cuff. Today we have a really cool little debut for you guys from Silver Watch Company. Of course, a little bit about the brand. They were founded back just last year in 2018, and they're basically a micro brand startup that really set out to recreate and even refine the original Rolex and Tudor mill subs. And of course, they are working in collaboration with Manchester Watchworks. That's a little bit of a tongue twister. As far as from their manufacturing standpoint goes, so you guys can expect nothing but quality from these pieces. You may remember my review of their original Archetype 1, which essentially was a really pretty much the best, most I'd say accurate reinterpretation of the original mill sub that there ever was. Thing was gorgeous, offered some really cool options, and I'm really happy to see their kind of Archetype 1.2 follow-up, really offering some outstanding value, but at the same time also that design and kind of that particular design aesthetic that we've all been craving, especially after Tudor released a couple of teasers before this past year's Basel World. I think everybody was pretty let down that they ended up referencing a more obscure timepiece from the past versus something that was really popularized and still quite popular. I mean, if you try to find one of these on the market now, the original ones, and I think of course you're really just buying in kind of to the aesthetic, obviously one, and then two, of course, the brand heritage. But for those of you that maybe want to get a little bit more for your money from an objective standpoint, getting a modern movement, of course, all the seals being good from a water resistance standpoint, and even having pretty much I believe a deeper water resistance in general, as well as of course having the modern amenities, like sapphire and whatnot, solid bracelet, nothing hollow. From that standpoint, have something very modern but still ties into that aesthetic. I think this could be a really great option, especially at the price point, guys. I mean, it's like less than 10% of the cost of what you're going to see these particular models go for in the used market today. So with that said, of course, this is a dive watch. Some key common characteristics when you're looking for a dive watch is you're going to want a screw down crown, of course, to provide that water resistance. You're going to want something that's tough, legible, with a dive time bezel, of course, and then if on bracelet, a diver's extension is always nice. So with all that said, let's go ahead and take a closer look. Okay, now as you can see, very familiar as far as the case goes, because you did see that on the Archetype 1. So you're still going to get those really great dimensions, and the scale is just about perfect here, especially matching with the proportions. So you're going to get that 39.5 millimeter diameter case. You're going to have a 12.5 millimeter height. Of course, if you do take out the crystal there, if you take just everything but the crystal in consideration, it's more like a 10.45. Then you do have that nice manageable 47 millimeter lug to lug width. Of course, everything is done in marine grade stainless steel there with that 316L. And then you're going to have a nice alternating use of brushed and polished finishes. And then which really ties in great with this new addition in this gorgeous Jubilee bracelet with that beautiful taper down to 16 millimeters to really just, it sells the whole vintage vibe. One thing I will mention here, guys, the studio lights are really washing out the dial. This dial and this bezel actually are quite a match. Of course, the way the light is going to hit it, this is a matte dial, so it's it's pretty much, once it absorbs all that light and it's going to reflect it back to you all the same way always. But the insert itself is aluminum, so there's going to be obviously some high points and some low points. You're going to see that kind of spectrum of dark and light. One thing I do want to say is that in person, the colors are very nicely matched. And even on the camera here with a little bit of washing out on that dial, I think you can still tell that these are really nicely paired and suited to each other. And I think the use of C3 definitely was a great choice. I think BGW9 would have been a bit too modern for it, and I think that the C3 definitely, obviously from a Lume standpoint, is nice and bright and quite lasts very, very long. But from another standpoint, also I think even when you get a little bit of that day lume, obviously while this is under the studio lights, it's getting charged quite bright. I think that little tint of color just really plays so well off of this blue, and again just ties into that very nice vintage aesthetic. So this is the Archetype 1.2 Blue Arrows model. And essentially it's referencing, that gorgeous Tudor Lollipop sub of the past. These should be ready by November this year in 2019, depending on when you watch this, of course. The price, the full retail on these is $459, and then you actually can get some nice special pre-order pricing, depending on when you watch this, for a nice savings. So definitely check the link in the description to see the current pricing there. Now, that crystal is that beautiful vintage dome sapphire with that inner AR coating, as you can see there. Really great. Nice legibility there, even at pretty harsh angles. So really beautifully done. And then just around that edge, that little bevel there, you get a little bit of distortion, but I think it's something that does add quite a bit of character to this timepiece. And this is the watch that I spent so many days and nights on eBay looking for something. Just basically a perfect condition Tudor Lollipop sub, which the better condition they are, the more unattainable they are, and it doesn't make sense to pay those prices for a piece like that. It really doesn't. I mean, obviously it doesn't have the same collectability as Rolex. The movements inside were much lower quality, quite generic and whatnot, and the watches were selling even cheaper a couple years ago before they became very much in style with collectors and became very desirable. I mean, if you think about the fact that modern subs just 10, 12, 15 years ago, you were able to get just for a couple $1,000. It really makes you realize that if anything, if you're going to invest in something vintage, then it should probably just be the actual Rolex sub from the collectability standpoint. And then when you start looking at the prices for vintage Tudor, it just doesn't have the same value proposition there. But they have some gorgeous styles, guys, and this is one of them. And I'm really happy that Silver Watch Company decided to pay homage to that particular timepiece, because this thing is absolutely a stunner in the steel. So of course this does have a 120 click bezel, and it has a beautifully done aluminum insert, true to form of the classic. And of course this is a pre-production model. I believe the only real change on this is the bezel is actually going to be just a bit sharper and deeper for a nicer grip. So visually, not much of a change. And then the date wheel, if you do get a date unit, I'm gonna be pretty much probably prompting for the no date, but for the date unit you're gonna get that really cool roulette wheel. So basically all the odd numbers, like this number 3, would be actually in red versus black text. So really cool. Oh, man, actually just thinking about that, I can imagine how awesome that's gonna look, and it almost makes me want to get a date model. But something about the no date, for me, having the full indices is just something that's very special. And I think for a lot of collectors, just that simplicity of that time only 3-hand steel sports watch, there's just something about that that is just very compelling, as you guys know, obviously from more recent releases, whether it's mainstream or micro brand. Now the movement is going to be the 9039 for the no date models, and of course 9015 for the models with date. Like I mentioned before, there will be a roulette wheel included for the date models. The case back, of course, is a very simple affair there. Just has the nice engravings and whatnot. And then when you get around to just the dial, you know, very clean, classic, printed everything there. You have that great kind of satiny blue dial, brushed hands, and then you're actually going to have the painted, really, really outstanding Lollipop seconds hand there. So that's going to be white, and then the way the light catches these brushed hands, it can almost make them white looking as well, but that's really just a really nice brush on there, which I think is great for legibility. Guys, look at the way these light up and just contrast depending on the reflections, and that way that the blue from the dial and the bezel are playing with each other. Really, really outstanding and gorgeous. This bracelet is wonderful. But before we talk too much more about it, we should probably get it on wrist, just so you guys can get some feedback from that standpoint. Of course, we do have the micro adjust, everything solidly milled. But you know what, guys, let's go ahead and get this piece on wrist. Okay, as you can see on my 7¼ inch wrist, this case works just about perfectly, guys. Oh man, visual weight on point. Even up close, this thing isn't going to appear too oversized. Just rides the wrist really well. That beautiful taper down to 16 millimeters, just classic. You just don't see that enough these days. Most companies would just taper that down to 18 millimeters and call it a day. But that 16 millimeter taper just gives you great range of motion, super comfortable. Obviously, it's a Jubilee bracelet. You can wear a little bit tighter, you can wear a little bit looser. But that thing just feels great on wrist. And then of course everything is solid, so it's not going to be tinny at all. It might have a nice little jingle to it, mostly due to the design of Jubilee bracelets, because of course they're so articulated, you can really flex them. And the nice thing is you do get that dividend paid back to you as far as comfort goes. Of course, the clasp here, quite minimalist, very simple flip lock clasp there, everything solid. You know, the folding scissor mechanism is going to be milled, and you actually do have the option of getting the original oyster bracelet, you know, that kind of 3-link style, or the Jubilee. I think the Jubilee just really speaks to the aesthetic of this particular model. You know, that real 70s vibe there, the way the light kind of catches everything, from the brushing, playing with the polishing there, the blues, the different hues. I think this is just an absolutely gorgeous aesthetic that is, you know, has yet to be recreated in the modern watch market, you know, apart from, of course, homages. And I think if you're going to pay homage, you might as well do it right and really put out something high spec, high quality, of a design that's just quite timeless at this point. So let's actually go ahead and move into some Lume shots. Okay, let's go ahead and hit the lights. As you can see, that C3 is just blasting away, guys. Outstanding Lume, just like you would expect. The nice thing is, of course, when fully lit, you know, in the darkness here, things looking great. And then actually in daylight, I think it still has a nice, you know, it's white enough with just a hint of green there. So really gorgeous execution from that standpoint. Sometimes you do see some application of C3 where it's just so thick that it just comes off reading very green in daylight. Here you get a nice white tone, and as you can see, even in that low light transition where you're going to see a little bit more light gradually go in there, you're still picking up a lot of Lume. That is still glowing super bright. I do like to do these low light transitions just to give you guys an idea of what this is going to look like coming in and out of a building, in and out of your vehicle, whatnot. Of course, just going through less optimal, you know, lighting conditions. A lot can be washed out by studio lights. You know, the nice thing is you can actually see the brushing on the bracelet and case there, the high polish, everything quite uniform, very low distortion. That brushing looks outstanding. And you can see the way that the light transitions over that dial, over that bezel insert, giving you something that I think, again, like as you can see here, really nicely paired. The matching there, I think, of the blue was very, very important, and I think they really, really pulled it off. And of course, you know, the studio lights definitely are going to play with it a little bit differently because everything just gets so saturated with light as it's being recorded, versus when you're actually, you know, out in the wild and whatnot. So really, really gorgeous piece, loving it. And you know, I guess for closing thoughts, just like before with the original Archetype 1, you know, you're going to get those beautiful vintage proportions. It's very comfortable, super balanced wear. So, I mean, this thing is just going to be a dream from a functional standpoint. All the modern amenities, of course, you're going to have that 300 meters of water resistance. Everything solid, you know, just everything beautifully machined and finished. So, you know, obviously this isn't a luxury piece. It's not meant to be. This thing is a steel sports watch, and really ties into what built the brand of Rolex. You know, before there was the hype and there was the horological significance. There's, you know, their whole story was all about creating something that was dependable from a functional standpoint. And here you have that ethos just done and executed, you know, to a very nice modern extent. As far as model variants go, in this particular batch of that, you know, Archetype 1.2, you're actually going to have the Sub Explorer, which is actually really, really gorgeous. Again, in a little bit of a more modern style, with the Lume and whatnot. Versus having the patinaed Lume. You're going to get the C3, but now you're going to get the 369. Very elusive model. You know, from that standpoint, even harder to find than these. It's going to be based off of that, basically Rolex Sub Explorer style watch. Really gorgeous black and steel, of course, motif. And that's something that, I mean, even from the micro brand market you've seen to be recreated many times and costing quite a bit. I mean, just what sticks out to me, of course, Mark II, Bill Yao, you know, with the big crown, Explorer sub style dials with that 369, gorgeous but quite expensive. And here you're gonna get, you know, really beautifully done quality, execution, the scale. It's not going to be upsized so much. Really, really just, I think is a perfect balance of, you know, vintage aesthetic and then modern build quality. Comparable models, there are tons of sub homages out there, guys, tons. But you know, there's really not that much that's out there that's this historically accurate. There's a lot of brands that will kind of take generic Submariner style cases and bracelets and whatnot, and you know, apply their own take on the dials and whatnot. Here you're gonna get something that I think is really engineered to be a really great modern representation, without actually, you know, watering down the design, just for the sake of being a slightly different, right? And I think there's a lot of brands that are doing that, and then there's a lot of brands that are kind of mixing things up just to mix them up. And I think it's really nice to see that kind of distilled purity here in design, that you're going to get from something that really doesn't need much help in the design market, just because it's an absolute stunner. Now, the bottom line, the Lollipop homage we've, you know, always hoped Tudor would release is here now. You know, Silver Watch Company really answered the call from the watch community. So I really hope you guys do give them some support. I know I will be, because this thing is absolutely gorgeous. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Are you going to go date, no date? I'm leaning towards no date right now, although the date with that roulette wheel I think is a really, really nice touch. Again, that just ties in, and it's just the right type of choice, right? It's nice to have that. It's not a trade-off, right? Which I think I find a lot with modern watches that are trying to recreate a vintage aesthetic. Is there's a trade-off. It's like, well, I do like, you know, the Oris Diver 65, but I don't like that it's only 100 meters water resistant. You know, there's just these inherent trade-offs, and I think the nice thing about this particular model is there's no real trade-off. I mean, you can choose between date and no date, but everything is absolutely outstanding. So without this thing running too long, if you like the video, please do it like, and if you already, please subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys.